Hello and welcome back to another episode of Mr. Burley Teaches, a series of lectures for the AP Environmental Science classroom. Today's topic is the tropical rainforest. We get to listen and learn, and in class we'll discuss all about one of the most fascinating, interesting ecosystems on the planet. All right, definitely the most diverse ecosystem on the planet. There's a little bit of background knowledge here. We all know that deforestation is a problem. Some of us know why, and those are the things we're going to be talking about. Right? Why are we choosing to decimate the rainforests, even though we know it's such an important commodity on the planet? It provides us with ecological services. Right? Why do we choose to do that? Right? What are the reasons? What does the tropical rainforest mean to us? What does it mean to the climate? So these are the things that we're going to learn about and discuss. What kind of animals are there? Right, we're going to look into the biodiversity a little bit. Such a big topic, almost too much to cover, too much information to cover in such a small little lecture like this. But I'm going to do my best to give you an overview about the tropical rainforest and things that you should know about them. All right, so we'll start by mentioning that the tropical rainforests have the highest net primary productivity on the planet. All right, that ecosystem holds more energy. It does more for us than any other ecosystem in the world. All right, and most of them are found in a belt around the equator of the Earth. And although they only make up about 5% of the Earth's total land, they contain 2/3 of the Earth's biomass. All right, so that right there tells you how much matter, how much living organisms, the nutrients that are in this system. Half of all the world's plants and animals can be found in tropical rainforests. Tremendous amount of biodiversity in a very small amount of land. All right, so try and gain an appreciation through this lecture for the tropical rainforest, even though we're so far away from them. All right, here in Pennsylvania, we're thousands and thousands of miles from the nearest rainforest. Many of you will never visit one in your entire life. And if you do, you'll definitely understand the importance of this ecosystem. And if you don't, hopefully it's through lectures and discussions like this one that let you gain a little bit of an appreciation for something that's so far away from our lives. All right. Couple things here, just a couple of statistics to mention. The largest continuous rainforest is in the Amazon basin in Brazil. All right, that's where most of the rainforests that are left in the world are, in Brazil. All right, they provide most of the world's ecological services. That's a term that we should have talked about already. Things that the environment does for us and for the planet. Things like cleaning water, holding carbon dioxide. All right. I'll number a couple of these here. We'll start off by saying, what benefits and ecological services does the rainforest provide? All right, and the first one is that it provides a tremendous amount of biodiversity. All right, there's a lot of species on Earth that we have because of the rainforest. All right. The rainforests are thousands of years old. They're ancient forests on the planet. They have tremendous amounts of time that leads to evolutionary biodiversity. So many species in there. So it provides us with a lot of the species of plants and animals that we have on Earth. And those plants and animals provide ecological services. A lot of those plants we use in medicines and creams and treatments. And then the animals also provide ecological services. So the amount of biodiversity that the tropical rainforest provides the planet is hard to ignore. Second thing that the rainforest does for us is it regulates our climate. As we lose the rainforests of the world, we can alter the climate of the Earth. And we use the word climate because climate is referring to the long-term weather patterns on the planet. Not the short term, but the long term. Right, these are effects that will be felt for a long time, many, many generations. How does it regulate the climate? It stores water, tremendous amounts of water. All right, it's a carbon sink. So our carbon dioxide that would normally be in the atmosphere is locked up in the plants and organisms in the rainforest. All right, tremendous impact on the climate. Here's one that people don't realize that the rainforest provides us. It provides protection for fisheries. What most people don't know is that when a rainforest meets the ocean, there is a section of the rainforest called a mangrove forest, and I have a picture later on in the slideshow. A mangrove forest, they're trees that grow in the water. Most of the tree is above the water, but their roots stick up out of the water, and their roots are this heavy matrix of intertwined roots that reach down into the water, and those roots provide a shelter for many of the species of fish on Earth to come and to spawn and to breed, and it allows more survival. So the fish of the planet use the mangrove forests as their spawning areas. Rainforests also protect from erosion. The rainforest sucks up a lot of water, tremendous amounts of water, which would normally fall on the land and would wash the soil away. So it literally protects from erosion. Rainforests create their own rain. If you want to be blown away, think about this. Rainforests absorb tremendous amounts of rainfall. So the plants and the ecosystem itself will absorb that water, but it puts it right back into the atmosphere through transpiration, part of the water cycle. So it will literally transpire the water back into the atmosphere. And then somewhere downwind, that water in the atmosphere will cool and condense and fall back down to a different part of the rainforest as rain. And the rainforest will absorb it and again transpire it back into the atmosphere. Farther downwind, it'll rain. So literally, rainforests are their own cycle, their own water cycle. They create their own rain. So if you take the rainforest away, the ability of the land to absorb water will be gone. All right, it won't be able to transpire it. You can hopefully see how it would change the climate. The last thing here is it protects from flooding, and that goes along with erosion. Right, in Bangladesh, where they're losing rainforest due to human activity, but also because of fires, they're having major problems with erosion and flooding in Bangladesh. All right, so just taking a look at some of these benefits, these ecological services, hopefully you can already realize that deforestation would have a laundry list of effects. All right, so hopefully you can see the impact that deforestation might cause. Nice image to hopefully help you gain an appreciation for these ecosystems. All right, there's the tremendous beauty. I like to think of aesthetic value, intrinsic value, just the sheer beauty of nature as having value. Right, that to me, that's an ecological service. Right, knowing that this is out there, knowing that the planet can produce this, I feel is a good thing. And hopefully you do too. Tremendous amounts of species. I like this picture because it shows the mist there, the transpiration of the trees and the plants, just putting water back into the atmosphere. The sheer volume of the rainforest is impressive, to say the least. This winding, meandering river quietly snakes through the rainforest and provides water to the birds and the animals and the organisms and the plants that use it not only for a highway but to drink. Right, you can almost imagine this ecosystem breathing, right, taking in carbon dioxide and exhaling oxygen. The rainforest can be thought of as the lungs of the planet. Alright, so let's take a look at the map here. And real quick, I'll go through this. You can see that most of the rainforests, and we'll go green, most of the rainforests are found in a belt, right around the equator, from the Tropic of Cancer to the Tropic of Capricorn. Alright, from 23.5 degrees north to 23.5 degrees south latitude. Alright, actually I'll do this. That's the Tropic of Cancer. Alright, and then we have 23.5 degrees south. That's the Tropic of Capricorn. All right, that's not random that most of the world's rainforests fall between those two lines of latitude. So what is it about that region of the world that allows the growth of tropical rainforests? What allows rain to occur there all the time? It has to do with the weather patterns. All right, and I'm going to walk you through this, and if you took meteorology, this will be a review of the world winds of the Earth. All right, this is a large-scale structure of the atmosphere for the Earth. All right, let's start here in Souderton, and you should know that all weather that we get comes from the west of the United States. So in the latitude that we live, on a large scale, wind and air moves like this. All right, so if there's a storm, and we'll go blue, if there's a storm out in Seattle, it'll move across the United States, and it may or may not hit Souderton. If there's a storm in the Gulf of Mexico, it may move across the United States and hit Souderton. All right, but other places in the world, there's different wind patterns. So for example, in the tropical rainforest, or down south of the Tropic of Cancer, winds go like this. Okay, these are called trade winds. All right, and then below and south of the equator, you have winds that go like this. Okay, follow along here. All right, now because the wind patterns look like that, whenever you have air converging, if air is coming together, all right, and I'll draw a little, I'll be down here in the Indian Ocean. Whoops, I don't want to draw another arrow, it's confusing. But whenever you have convergence, what's called convergence of air, let's draw a quick, I'm going to do this very quickly. All right, let's draw a ground surface. When you have air coming from one side, coming from the other, and it's converging, air cannot go underground. When air converges, they can't go underground. What happens is air hits itself and it will rise. All right, it will rise in the atmosphere. And whenever air rises in the troposphere, you should know that the temperature goes down and water will cool and condense. And whenever air rises and that water will cool and condense, here's what you get. Rain. All right, so what we have is an area of the world where air is constantly converging and air is constantly rising and water in the air is constantly cooling and condensing, and you have constant rain. All right, alternatively, hopefully that makes sense. Alternatively, let's look right here where you have air moving away from each other, where you have divergence of air. And how can I do this? I'll draw right here, down here by South America. You have the ground surface. Whenever you have air diverging, it's going away from itself, air will sink. And if there's any water in that air, instead of cooling and condensing, it will evaporate. And you'll have dry, sunny conditions wherever you have air diverging, because air is sinking and it warms as it gets closer to the Earth. That's a property of the troposphere. Any water will actually evaporate. So we have a region of the world, and I'll use, sorry, this is getting a little messy. I'll use this color. We have an area of the world where air is constantly diverging, right in here. And that's where all the world's deserts are. All right, so south in Mexico, Arizona, New Mexico, the Sahara, all right, the Middle East. And the same reigns true in the southern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere is a little different just because there's not that much land mass down there. But, you know, the Australian outback, here's this belt. The Australian outback, there's deserts down in here. All right, so it's all about the world wind patterns of Earth and whether air is diverging, or in the case of the rainforest, air is constantly converging at the equator. And that's where all the world's rainforests are found. All right, so that's a bit of a messy diagram there, but hopefully you get an understanding of why they are where they are. All right, real quick, here's Brazil and the Brazilian rainforest. Here's the Democratic Republic of Congo in there. All right, here's Bangladesh and Indonesia. And then there's even some rainforest here on the eastern coast of Australia. Okay, so those are the major zones of rainforest on the planet. Here's a picture of the mangrove forest, where the rainforest meets the ocean. You have these mangrove forests, and we walked through these in the British Virgin Islands when we were down there, and they had to build a plank platform through the mangrove forest, and it was very, very dense. These roots are very strong. You can see how they reach down through the water, down into the sediment of the river or the beach, wherever they're growing, and they're extremely dense. And this is a great area for fish to find little cavities and crevices, hide, spawn, survive, and reproduce. This is a great place for the ocean's fish to spawn. All right, it's also a nice place for anaconda, so you don't really want to be in the wrong place at the wrong time inside of a mangrove forest. The other thing about mangrove forests is that they're very delicate ecosystems, where the ocean meets where the river meets the ocean, or the rainforest meets the ocean. Especially where a river meets the ocean and you have a mangrove forest, because any pollutants that were upstream get deposited here. So pollution has a devastating effect on this organism, on these plants and trees. And if there's any pollution that's dissolved in the water, it'll have an effect. But also any pollution that's big, like water bottles or candy wrappers, things that are in the ocean or in the river. I mean, look at the roots. Those types of things get stuck in there. Bags. When we were down there, we saw all kinds of bags. Right before we got there, there was a hurricane, and the storm surge pushed all kinds of pollution into the mangrove forest, and it got stuck. And now it's all in there. And we saw birds and frogs and all kinds of organisms hopping around all this pollution. And once the pollution is in there, it's really hard to get it out. Very dense. And it's not going to wash away easily, so it breaks down inside that ecosystem, and now you have petroleum chemicals leaching into this ecosystem, and it just wreaks havoc on the mangrove forest. So these are in decline, and they're very delicate ecosystems, but they're good for our planet because they provide protection for fish. Let's take a look at the structure of the rainforest. So when we're talking about the structure of the rainforest, we can break it down in about 3 sections. And we're going to start with the forest floor. The floor is very nutrient poor. All right, now you'd think to yourself that the amount of biomass in the trees, in the plants, all that leaf litter coming down, you'd think that the soil would be rich in nutrients, but it's not. It's actually the opposite. It's very nutrient poor. All the nutrients that are available are in the plants, so the soil has none. The plant's roots don't grow into the soil. They basically grow in the leaf litter, in that detritus right at the surface. You'll see tree roots around this area in the deciduous forests that reach real far down and tap into water sources. In the rainforest, it doesn't need that. There's enough nutrients in the plants, in the leaf litter, that they don't really need to grow deep at all. So that leaves the soil very nutrient poor. So you have a lot of iron, a lot of clay, very orange. Inside, in that forest floor, the conditions are very dark. Okay, we're going to talk about the canopy in a second. The canopy blocks most light, so it's very dark at the forest floor, which means it's actually cool. The temperature is probably somewhere between 70 and 80. A lot of people think that it's stinking hot in there, and it's not. It's dark and humid, but it's somewhat cool, in the mid-70s, and there's relatively no wind. Very protected, the forest floor. The second level is called the canopy. The canopy blocks 98% of the sunlight, leaving the understory very cool. But what's important about the canopy is that 2/3 of all life lives in the canopy. All life in the rainforest. 2/3 of all the life. This is where the life is. People think it's at the ground level, but it's not. Everything is in the trees. Alright, so the canopy blocks the wind, it holds moisture, it blocks the sunlight. There's all kinds of really cool specialized plants. You can literally call the canopy the roof of the rainforest. because when you fly over top, you should literally see just a green carpet, and that's the canopy, the roof of the rainforest. Doesn't allow light in, holds all the moisture. Beautiful place. And then there's a couple of types of plants that you should know about, some specialized plants that live in the canopy. And the first kind is called, right up here, epiphytes. Epiphytes. They're a type of plant that use the tree. They benefit from growing in the tree. So you'll see, let's say, a branch here. And actually, I'll draw it over here. Here you have the trunk. You have a branch off the tree. You'll see like maybe a fern-looking plant. Epiphyte. There's thousands of varieties of epiphytes, and the roots will dangle down here and use the tree. Alright, so the epiphyte benefits from the tree because it's a little higher up, it gets some moisture, it's protected. The tree doesn't really care, but the epiphyte benefits. So what we have is commensalism, that type of relationship here. Alright, the plant benefits, but the tree doesn't mind. There's other kinds of specialized ones called the liana plant. Right here, liana plant. You'll see those as gigantic vines, and people think that they grow up, but these are actually just huge vines. And Tarzan is famous for swinging on the liana plant. Those what people think are vines, and they're not really a vine. That's inaccurate to say. They're roots that come down from a plant that's living in the tree. All right, and they're very, very dense and strong. But those are not the vines, but those are the roots that Tarzan swings off of. So I guess they use the word vine because it's more attractive, Tarzan swinging on a vine, rather than saying Tarzan swings on epiphyte roots. All right, monkeys like to use those roots as highways to get through the trees. You'll see them swinging on them to get through the trees. So they're literally like the roads or the highways for monkeys. So that's again a commensalism, that type of relationship between the monkey and the plant. All right, so you'll see these types of epiphytes everywhere. There's thousands of species. All right, so let's talk about the last layer of the rainforest. Every once in a while, you'll see a break in the canopy where a tree is projecting up above the canopy. All right, we call that the emergent layer. All right, the emergent layer is a very different place than the canopy and below. These tallest trees, which the most famous is called the kapok tree. All right. Above the canopy, the weather conditions drastically change. It's like they're like little islands that stick up above the canopy. Up there you get more sunlight, so it's very sunny. It's very hot and windy. It's much different than the floor. Not many trees survive, but some do, and they'll stick out to you as being ones of the emergent layer. And what's interesting is that these can be their own ecosystems. Because they're in a different place, different species will be up there rather than in the canopy where it's very different climatically. So these trees can act as their own little ecosystems. Alright, so that's a bit of the rainforest structure. Alright, so hopefully you got some of those in your notes, trying to gain an understanding and an appreciation for this ecosystem. Let's move on and look at some of the more interesting species that we can find here. Alright, here's a picture of the soil. This outcrop here, you can see how orange, clay-rich, alright, devoid of nutrients. In the deciduous forest here, where there's a lot of A horizon and O horizon, that brown, dark, nutrient-rich, organic-rich soil is up here. But in the rainforest, you find something like this. Very poor quality soils. Right? Everything is in the leaf litter. Here you're looking at the canopy and just some tree diversity. Here you got some of those epiphytes. Here's some more just tremendous amounts of life. Diversity. Here's the liana vine. That's what I was talking about. And you can imagine Tarzan swinging on those. Also imagine the monkeys using those as highways. All right, they do not grow up. They're not vines. They're actually roots growing down from a plant that's up in the tree. All right, and I like this image. We're standing in a creek or a river, and you see the canopy, and then you see one of those big trees there emerging from the canopy in that emergent layer. All right, just a nice image. All right, so let's take a look at some of these animals. The most famous frog in the world, the red-eyed tree frog. All right, why is it the most famous frog in the world? Because it's the most photographed. Whenever you see a picture, and you'll know these from, if you'll start noticing how many pictures there are of this frog. Whenever people picture a frog, this is the one. It's the most photographed frog in the world. And he is cute. Just some other frog species out there. Think about the adaptations and the strategies that these animals use to survive. Here's the poison dart frog, and I just think these are really interesting, both culturally and ecologically. Usually the rule of thumb is the more color, the more exotic the color of the tree frog, that's nature giving you a warning. The more color, the more poisonous, and you don't really want to touch these, especially if you have a cut or a scratch or an open wound of any type. They're very poisonous, and it attacks the nervous system. Indigenous people would take their arrows, they'll use a shaft for an arrow, carve it down to a point, and then rub the point onto the back of the poison dart frog. And those arrows they use to shoot monkeys out of the trees for food, for whatever reason. And the poison will attack the monkey's nervous system, which will stun it. It'll fall out of the tree, and then the people can go over and capture or kill the monkey. So the poison dart frog is just really cool in my opinion. All right, don't go out and get any of these, because then you're contributing to the illegal wildlife trade, and we don't want that either. Lots of varieties of monkeys. All right, this one here is the one that's notorious for stealing tourist backpacks or jumping on your back and taking your stuff. All right, so you got to watch out for these guys. They're very smart and very quick. They hang out in packs. They hang out a lot. That's just a nice picture. All right, the spider monkeys can grow a little bit bigger. And here you got a picture of one. It's hanging in the tree. They use their tails like feet. Here's a clear butterfly, just some cool insects. You can see the little circle on his wing there that may or may not look like an eye, hopefully to ward off predators. Just a pretty cool species. Here's a butterfly called the blue morpho. Morpho, M-O-R-P-H-O, for those of you taking notes. The blue morpho is the largest butterfly in the world. It has it can get up to a 1 foot wingspan. All right, so think about that. And these are interesting because they almost went extinct. They were used to add color to ashtrays in the 1960s and 70s. They were caught, captured, and used as decoration in products and then sold. And I found one on eBay. Here you go. It's a wicker blue butterfly tray. All right, so you just literally press it down into the product and put a layer of lacquer on there. So for $35 you can get one of these products of this almost extinct animal. But I feel that their population has bounced back since this fad has ended. But it's a nice example of how a species can go extinct from something so stupid as the use of it as color. Here's a tree, and you can see that the roots are growing above the surface. So it's just a nice example that roots do not go too deep at all. They want to tap the nutrients in the leaf litter, right, in the detritus, not into the depleted A horizon. What would be the A horizon here? The coati is the raccoon of the rainforest. All right, here they have all their tails up. They must be alert, ready to go, listening to a lecture about humans, obviously. And here you go. Here's a nocturnal species, just a strange animal. He obviously lives at night. Look at his eyes. You could tell he's probably nocturnal. This is a very sad picture because he's looks to be in a cage of limited dimensions. Alright, and then there you go. There's your sloth. And from a previous lecture, you saw that there's algae growing in his fur, which keeps the Aztec ants away as he hangs out in the Cecropia tree. Okay, just another adaptation. Here's another cute little guy. Alright, plants grow very big to take advantage of the low light conditions at the forest floor and under the canopy. Those big leaves can be protection for a little bat in this case, weathering out the rain. And then you have your generalists. Here's the squirrel of the rainforest. And one of the problems is, as we cut down the rainforest and succession happens, a new forest will grow. It is very different from the forest that was there than the rainforest. And as those new forests grow, it's the generalists that are moving in, those species that can basically live anywhere, like squirrels. So once you cut down a rainforest, you lose the biodiversity that was there. All those rare animals and species, all those important ones that provide biodiversity, it's the generalists that then move in. That's why we see so many of the same animals here in the Northeast where it's been developed. It's just squirrels and rabbits and deer, those generalists that can live basically anywhere. So the rainforest has those two. At the beaches is a very important part of the ecosystem. It provides habitat for nesting area for sea turtles, some of the world's most endangered sea turtles. Okay, and then you got indigenous people, and being an anthropology major in college, there's a lot of indigenous people that still call the rainforest home. There's some of the least studied people because they're so dangerous. They do not want civilization. They will do anything, including kill you, to keep you out. And there's a famous picture of a plane that took a photograph of what looked like the people in the top picture there. The plane was going by, and the pilot snapped a picture of the people blowing poison darts at them and throwing spears, and that was the first time that those people were actually even seen. All right, so they're still down there, and they do not want progress. They get very angry as the oil companies are starting to move into their areas. The deforestation is occurring. They will protect. There's a good movie out there called Medicine Man, and we might even watch it in class. It's with Sean Connery, and if we don't watch it in class, I highly suggest that movie. It's a real nice account, a good story about scientists and indigenous people, their interactions. But the rainforest is not for people. It's very, very dangerous. It's incredible that people even live there. One of the dangerous species out there is called the Botfly, and the Botfly will land on you and bite you and lay its eggs under a couple of the layers of your skin. And what happens is those eggs will hatch under your skin. You won't even really know it until they start hatching, and you see the little baby botflies and the larvae crawling around under your skin. Now your first instinct is going to be to cut it open and get those larvae out, the larvae. But what happens is when you make an incision, you're going to cut one of the larvae, it opens up, and you're going to get infection. You're probably going to have your limb amputated, all right, because of the infection, gangrene. So what you need to do is if you're bit by a botfly and you see the larvae forming underneath your skin, you just have to monitor them and wait for them to hatch and then crawl out themselves. And in that way, you'll avoid infection and you'll keep your limb. And that might be really hard to do. There's a lot of accounts of people being in the rainforest, getting bit by a botfly, and having to lose a limb because of infection. All right, and then there's also a lot of accounts of people just winging it, hanging out, and waiting until those larvae hatch and crawl out themselves. So keep that in mind if you're ever down there. People are moving into the area. All right, here's just a couple of pictures of some really cool living situations in the rainforest. All right, there's resorts. Okay, there's permanent residences. This one is development in Brazil when they had the World Cup. So they went ahead and built these apartment buildings. And you can see here's a water tower right there. These are just big apartment buildings complete with a park. You can see what happens here when there's deforestation. Here's a pool trying to bring Western society. This is in the middle of the rainforest. And when they had the World Cup in Brazil, this was one of the communities that popped up to house the people, reporters, athletes, and so forth, right in the middle of the rainforest. Alright, and I like this picture here because you could see a guy in the middle of the rainforest ziplining to his house there. Just kind of ziplining right through the forest to his house. So I thought that was kind of cool. Alright, now, the fun is over. Let's talk about what's happening and why it's happening. It's a travesty, and we really need to internalize what's happening and what it means for us. So let's take a look at what's going on here. We're looking at a series of roads that were built to aid in a large-scale deforestation project. Okay, literally just taking the land and stripping it of the wood. All right, in this case, for our number one reason the rainforests are being deforested, logging. Okay, logging companies will come in, they'll clear cut, and all that's left is the exposed soil. We're talking about trees by the millions are now available and put on the market. All right, trees by the millions. This is the best way for countries, for tropical countries, to make money. It's their most valuable resource they have. Countries like Brazil have debts, and they have to help establish a financial system for their people. So they're selling off the rainforests. Right, that's what's happening. Brazil wants to be on the world stage too. They're trying to get themselves on their feet as a developing country. They want to move into the realm of being developed. They're about to explode onto the world stage, but the price is the rainforest and the sales of wood. Home Depot and Lowe's have recently made the change to not buy wood from the tropical rainforest. So there are companies out there that, in our eyes, are doing the right thing. But in Brazil, deforestation isn't even looked at as bad. It's looked at as the price of progress. Right? It's looked at as progress. So everything is relative. Standing here in Pennsylvania talking about the impacts of deforestation is a lot different than living your life in Brazil and wanting to establish economic development. Okay, so this problem is a lot of socio-economic origin rather than environmental. All right, so when you cut the trees down, the soils are so bad. Remember we said that they're poor soils. When you take the trees away, you're basically breaking the nitrogen cycle. All right, and you end up with barren land like this. Nothing really grows. So this is one way that it happens. Look at the darkness in that forest. Beautiful. A second reason for deforestation is slash and burn agriculture. All right, slash and burn agriculture is what it sounds like. They literally slash the trees down, push them over, and burn them in place. So what they're doing is they're burning out the area for farming. It provides carbon to the soils, but the soils are nutrient poor anyway. But what they're doing is they're clearing the land, and by burning the trees, you're clearing the land, getting it ready for farming. I read somewhere that at any point in time, right now, there is at least 2,000 forest fires in Brazil alone, from slash and burn agriculture. All right, we're losing about 0.8% of rainforest every year. And Brazil has one of the highest rates of destruction. So think about that, almost 1% of the rainforest per year. Hard to accept. All right, so here you go. Here's a controlled burn. You know, what's bad is that we lose the climate condition where they make their own rain and it starts to dry out. Now that we've taken the forest away, the tropical sun is very strong. It's very difficult to grow anything back. So when you cut down a rainforest in these ways, you really won't ever get it back, not on a human time scale. All right, and what we end up with is literally just destroyed rainforest. All right, and it's not like succession here, where it takes 100 years to grow back into a mature forest and you get those same species back. It could take up to 10,000 years for a tropical rainforest to go through succession. So we're talking about ancient ecosystems. Just end up with just barren landscape. Here's the grasses that grow back. Just a destroyed landscape. Okay, I'm bringing up the avocado tree. All right, we take avocados for granted here. Relatively inexpensive, but in the rainforest, it's one of the keystone species, and it's one of only a couple of trees that fruits all year round. All right, the fig tree is another one, but the avocado tree, which we use for the fruit, but we also cut down to use in furniture. All right, they produce fruit all year round, and most every form of life in a rainforest depends on the avocado tree. So when we burn them down or use these trees for our furniture and destroy the rainforest, when secondary succession occurs, these are the types of plants that won't come back. All right, they take centuries to grow. So we end up with a weakened ecosystem. I just want to get that point across. All right, and this picture is showing a small-scale farm. We're not talking about all the time that it's an industrial scale. Small-scale farming also has a big impact because there's lots of them. The Brazilian government is having a hard time handling people in cities, so they're encouraging people to go out into the rainforest and settle, right? Build farms. So what the government will do is they will literally build these roads, and you see a road right here. The government will build a road, encourage people to go out and start farming, but what happens is a farmer will, here's where they settled here. A farmer will clear cut an area. Right, let's say they slash and burn this little area for farming, and they'll farm that area for 4 or 5 years. The soils are terribly poor in nutrients. We've already established that fact. So after 4 or 5 years, the farmer can't use that land anymore, so they'll literally just slash and burn another section, use that for 4 or 5 years, slash and burn a section, 4 or 5 years, slash and burn a section. And what we're getting is these patterns of destruction. And through those patterns of destruction, you see a very fragmented rainforest. And that's going to be bad, right? Not only for the farmer, but also for the rainforest. All right, so that's what these patterns of destruction here is what you're looking at. Now, these people are just trying to survive, and here you see slash and burn on a small scale. They're not evil people. Okay, even though this imagery is very dark. Here's a house. This is one of our settlers here. These are not evil people. They're just trying to live and survive. They can't live in cities. The government just doesn't have the resources for them. So here's a family that's trying to live off the land. All right, this problem has a lot to do with our social and economic conditions throughout the world. Not evil people, just trying to survive. All right, I can't stress that enough. So this is your education on the rainforest. You know, learning about what's going on in our world and why. All right, so the farmer can only farm for 4 or 5 years. All right, and then after that, the soil is poor, they have to move on, and the only thing that will grow is grass. And here's probably the last year of this crop, whatever's growing here. The farmer will have to move on, grass will come up, and that's when a different industry comes in, the cattle ranchers. All right, so we have our third industry. We have logging, farming, and now you have cattle ranchers. And they come in after the land has been abandoned by farmers because grass will grow. And these cattle ranchers will go ahead and let their cattle graze. The grass is the only thing that's growing. So they come in, eat all the grass, and then the soils are completely depleted. of all their nutrients. And what do you get when soils are completely devoid of all nutrients and exposed? We're watching our rainforests turn into deserts right before our eyes. Okay, so hopefully that really gives you an understanding of the problem, what's happening and why, and what can happen if we're not conscious of this. We're literally turning one of the most ancient and rich ecosystems in the world into deserts. This slide and the next slide is going to end our discussion of the rainforest, but this is probably the most important topic. All right, this topic is called the Thomas Lovejoy Island Experiment, and hopefully this also opens your eyes. Okay, so Thomas Lovejoy saw an opportunity to do some research, and he got together with a company who proposed a large-scale deforestation project. And what he said was he wanted to keep a couple of islands intact. So here's an island, there's one down here in the lower left, and there's actually one right here as well. Alright, so after he left those islands intact, he went and studied. Actually, he did a lot of research before the deforestation, and then he did research after the islands were formed. So they went ahead and slash and burn agriculture, kept everything but the islands. And what Thomas Lovejoy found was basically two things. He found that when you cut down a rainforest, all the animals will go to the islands. So animals that lived out here, let's say monkeys lived out in here, once you cut the rainforest, they have to go somewhere. So they immediately go to these islands. All right? And they call that the refugee effect. All right, they have to go somewhere. But the problem is, this area, the amount of area of this rainforest, it may have housed, let's say, 15 monkeys before the deforestation. Well, now, through the refugee effect, all these monkeys go in there, and now you have 65 monkeys. All right, what's going to happen to the food source? You have an explosion of population. The food source is going to decline, so you're going to have a rapid decline in population, and now you have 0 monkeys. The monkey population died off. All right, so that's one example of the refugee effect and the negative impact it can have. And that happened to every life form in the island. Every life form died off, and it was devoid of all life inside that island. Now, the other thing he found is also interesting. Let me erase here. Okay, the other thing he found was called the edge effect. He found that when you create an edge, here's this island that was left behind. Right here, the trees and the species of plants that were on the edge were once in the middle of the forest. Well, they're evolved. They were once in the middle of the forest, so they've grown to those conditions. So once you expose those species to an edge, now you have more sunlight, you have more wind, you have different temperatures. You've basically changed the environment that tree doesn't usually live in. So the edge will die, which will create a new edge. And the same thing will happen to those trees. They're not equipped to handle that type of environment, so you'll have a die-off, and then it'll be a new edge. So what he saw was, over time, these islands disappeared. They got smaller, they shrank, and then they disappeared. Every one of them. Right? And we called that the edge effect. Tremendous amounts of problems with deforestation. You can try and conserve all you want. You can keep these little islands out there, but first the life will go, and then they themselves will disappear. This was the Thomas Lovejoy Island Experiment. So you're asking yourself, what can we do? What can be done about this problem? Aside from consumer choice, all right, making sure that companies that we use in our daily lives are not participating in deforestation or funding deforestation. We have to be careful about where we get our wood and our products. You even have to be careful about the banks that you bank with, because their funding interests may be tied to companies who are doing deforestation. All right, the oil companies are a new industry that's getting involved in deforestation. All right, but what we can do on the environmental side of things, and this is also came out of Thomas Lovejoy. All right, he proposed this. He said we need to create what's called biosphere reserves. Okay, so this was his final conclusion. So when we think about biodiversity and hotspots, how do you save and preserve biodiversity? You have to create these biosphere reserves. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to pick the most ecologically sensitive area. So let's say, depending on what species and resources are right there, we're going to choose that area. It's the most ecologically sensitive area and one we don't want to harm. So under the principle of preservation, all right, we're going to call this the core. All right, and that area, you cannot touch it. You may or may not be even able to go into it. All right, all human activities are prohibited. Because of its importance as a habitat or keystone species, this is left to nature and nature alone. That's the core. And then what we're going to do is we're going to preserve another couple thousand acres. These can be thousands of acres. All right, we're going to preserve that, and we're going to call that the buffer zone. All right, now the buffer zone has restricted activities. All right, you might be able to hike, you might be able to fish, camp, maybe some limited agriculture depending on if there's indigenous communities living, working there. All right, you might be able to use it for research. Nevertheless, restricted activities would occur in the buffer zone, which buffers the core. Then we need to preserve an area outside of the buffer zone. All right, in that area we're going to call the transition zone. All right, in the transition zone, what we're going to do is we're going to combine conservation with human activities. Whoops. But we're going to do it in a sustainable way. All right. So from the transition zone to the core, you have levels of restricted activity. You gradually get more restricted. But we have a transition zone which buffers the area where there's no regulations. All right, so you got that transition zone, which is a buffer of the buffer zone, which is a buffer to the core, where you cannot touch, which is permanently preserved. This idea came out of Thomas Lovejoy's experiment, and his final conclusion is if we are going to preserve the rainforest, we need to do so in these biosphere reserves. And we're doing it. This is successful. All right, Costa Rica is one of the countries in the world that has high success rate in preserving rainforest. Okay, the majority of the Costa Rican land is rainforest, and it's actually a national park. All right, so this is the plan, but can this plan keep up pace with the destruction? All right, we might only find out in the future where either we save the rainforest and we look back and say we did the right thing, or in the future we're going to talk about this time now as when we lost our rainforest. Hopefully you enjoyed this lecture. Hopefully you learned a lot about the rainforest. But from my perspective, hopefully you gained more appreciation for this problem, why it's happening, what is actually happening, and what we can do about it. Bring your questions and comments to class. I can't wait to hear them. All right, this is such a nice, sensitive topic. Let's talk more about it in class. Thanks for listening.